Alright, there we go. So this is another collection of footage that I've done. It's the same thing as my last one. But this time it's going to be a bit different. I'm not going to be as ranty as last time. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Let's just go ahead and do this. Okay, so I've seen the first 5 minutes of it. It works fine. So let's go ahead and get this going. So it's the same. Yeah, it's the same game. And the first thing I want to say is I was trying to figure out what Chris Cox's political views are. First of all, uh, it was very hard to find anything. First of all, there are a few people named Chris Cox. One is a writer, one is a director, one I think is either the previous owner of Facebook or was someone from Facebook. Um, so I had to look up by his full name. So his full name is Charles Christopher Cox. Um, so look that up, which narrowed it down a little bit, but it wasn't really that easy. Now he has a pretty good record as far as the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. He took on a reform approach. His approach to reforming the SEC was consensus based, basically trying to get everyone on board. A not a I guess a impulsive or reactionary thing. So oh yeah I think oh yeah before I go any further, I think if I remember right, I heard something like a missile being launched in the game, but I couldn't find out where that was, and it didn't seem like an attack. So I have no idea why that happened, but I just randomly heard it. Getting back to Chris Cox, the approach he took was one of slow, um, calm, um, what would you call it? Reform. Like, see how things happen first, and then, you reform it. Sorry for being loud, sorry. Uh, I guess reform as you go, maybe. I don't know how you would describe it, but it was a pretty solid record. He reformed how the SEC really works. I think he reformed it to more of a protecting actual investors and eliminating fraud sort of position. He helped to modernize the SEC by introducing a new information system, which basically made it a lot easier to organize like the paperwork and the records in the SEC, so everything could be there at once instead of just having to go through all of these systems, all of these records, and be so confused. Um, One of the things that he targeted, or that he did, was he championed a reform for corporate, um, corporate transparency, so that, well, I guess it's two parts. One, it makes it, what would you call it? Exactly how the corporation, I guess, does its finances is a lot more public. So the public actually has an idea of what they're doing, and the language as well. Chris Cox put in a plain English initiative, so instead of using essentially legalese, which is um, essentially it's the bureaucratic language that corporations and Congress and things like that use, um, and essentially make it into, hey, no, don't speak like this. Just speak how you normally would. Speak English. Legalese is like the bureaucratic version of I like to speak in big words so people think I'm smart. I'm just gonna leave it at that because that's what it really is. What else did he do? I think he trying to think. It was pretty hard to find again, political positions from him, because all of his political, I guess, appointments, because he was on with the Reagan administration, he was with both Bushes and with Clinton. Um, they weren't really that political. They were more of a administrative role, but he did pretty good. And he also was responsible for some of the, I guess, the more cautious response that the SEC had to the start of the '08 recession. And I say cautious in, well, I don't say cautious in quotes. It was a cautious response. It didn't do a whole lot, though. Well, then again, I don't know if anything could have been done to at least help in that sense. The recession really hit people hard. Okay, I'm gonna shut up about that. From what I could tell about Chris Cox is, well, he's a Republican. On this game, he's a constitutionalist. And from what I could gather, he seems to be a more moderate Republican, like not the partisan type of Republican we have now, more of a willing to work with other people, it doesn't matter what side they're on, Republican. He was committed more to reform and transparency, I would argue. Um, and there was one indication that I was able to get, which was a website that where they it's kind of like a graph where they plot the, I guess, the political standing of everyone in Congress, or specifically the House of Representatives, because he was representative for Orange County from 2005 to 2007. And he seemed to be somewhere around like the center right to moderate right. So probably something like an old school Republican. I'm not talking. He was a different approach compared to Reagan. I'm not saying Reagan was a extremist. I'm just saying politically compared to Reagan, he was a much more, I guess, not moderate, a much different approach. I would say the closest, politically speaking, the closest or the best thing I could say about Chris Cox is, well, one, apparently I can't speak without my mouth twitching. And two, he seems to be probably the closest thing that you could have to a Teddy Roosevelt type Republican. So, like the, moderate, reform-centered politician. Now, that's not a bad thing at all. In fact, I wish more Republicans were like that. I wish more politicians in general, were somewhat like that. Moderate, not being a jerk, and actually passing legit reforms at work. But whatever. Let's see. So what else is going on in here? Oh yeah, this is after a recent war. What is it? I think Lebanon had invaded Syria to basically because they couldn't pay their debt. I accidentally made a war goal with that, although I didn't follow up on it. I really don't see much point in declaring war on a nation because they can't pay their debt. It doesn't make any sense. Because really, what do you think you're going to do that's better than them, considering the circumstances and considering what they have at their disposal? You're not going to do a much better job. You're probably going to make it worse. So it's best really to just let that go and actually probably give financial aid so they can help. Don't worry about the debt for now. Just make sure you can actually have a stable economy first, and then you can start paying your debt. Don't worry about that. So the opposite of being a loan shark. Yeah, this is when I started to create dedicated, like, carrier strike groups. So I call them, did I call them carrier task force? Yeah, carrier task force. Essentially, it's a carrier strike group, but it's not centered on one carrier. Uh, it's two carriers, and it has much more focus on the smaller ships. So frigates, as an example, there's like 20 frigates in each one. Now, in case you're wondering why so many, well, because frigates are smaller than a destroyer, so they're less expensive. So you can have more of them for the same amount of money. And two, frigates can do the same missions as destroyers. They don't necessarily have the same range, but still, they can do the same things that a destroyer can. Anti-air, anti-surface, anti-submarine, any sort of role that a destroyer can do, a frigate can. So, instead of putting the focus on destroyers, put the focus on frigates. This will also give the Navy more of an ability to have a flexible response. So if like I don't know, like say there's an issue with oh, I don't know, say one nation, and these aren't any in particular, just as an example. Say one nation does not like the fact that, you know, they have to share their quote international waters with other nations, even though it's really international waters, and as a result they do stuff like I don't know, ramming cargo ships for no reason. In that case, the U.S. Navy, which, you know, it's supposed to be global, so what am I trying to say? Instead of just having a destroyer, they would have maybe a few frigates there. What was the comparison they used? A policeman on the street versus a policeman in a cruiser. And I think the first one is a more, I guess, friendly, respectful approach. The other one is just the cop doesn't trust everyone, so he's just in the cruiser. I'm not sure how apt that is, but I don't know. I have no idea what I'm saying. I'm surprised anybody watched this. Or watched this last video. It's turning out the same way as this is turning out the same way. Alright, so what else is there? I don't remember exactly what I'm doing for this. You saw on there earlier deploy the E Brigade and the S Brigade. This is in response to Russia's annexation of Crimea. I don't know why, but they put that way earlier in here. In reality, that didn't happen until 2014. Unless it happened unless something else happened, I don't know. But in this case, yeah, but I think it was 2005, 2004, maybe early 2006. I don't quite remember. But that was a response to it, and those two brigades are going to be used as the basis for new response forces, not solely focused on divisions, but more on a brigade level, so it's more flexible. It's easy because the unit is small, because a brigade has less manpower and equipment than a division. It's able to be moved a lot quicker compared to a division, so it's more flexible. Oh yeah, and I think this is also when... Is this when a recession's going on? I really should go back. I probably should go back. Let me remember this. Is there like a recession? I don't quite remember. Nope. Okay, so this is just making sure that my forces can respond where needed. I also moved 3 infantry divisions? Brigades? I forget which one they were. From Iraq to Poland, I think. Because the goal is, once Iraq reaches a certain level of, I guess, divisions or whatnot, the goal is to slowly move my forces out. So as Iraq gains the ability to protect itself, like, maybe not fully, but for the most part, my forces will be withdrawn. The goal is to withdraw fully once Iraq is fully stabilized, which is going to take a good while, but it's worth it, I would say. Once Iraq is fully stabilized, the puppet ship will end. Yeah, it's a puppet. It's the same thing as like the Philippines. Which is, the goal is independence, but until the nation gets to a point where that's feasible, like it's stable enough to where that can happen, the country will still be occupied, although it will still be given greater autonomy as time goes on. I forget exactly what happened here. Maybe I should have cut this out. I might. I think I might cut this out. So you see, what else happened in this? We got military movements. You got something. The main thing that happens in this is that, dang it, why do I not remember? I literally did this. There we go. Okay, so the main thing regarding... Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Main thing regarding the military is... Okay, there we go. So the main thing about the military in this is not necessarily just to increase it, but more to reform how it works, which is why there's the huge increase in spending. It's one, to increase the size of the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy as quickly as possible, as reasonably as possible, so that the U.S. military can be in more areas at once to fulfill its goals of, essentially keeping the world as stable as it can, ensuring, there's no threat to world peace, or at least minimizing that possibility. And in the event of any of its allies being attacked, it would be able to respond quickly. For that, the plan is to have, at least in the Army, something like 1.5 million personnel, which I know is a lot, but it's kind of needed. Although the goal kind of is to transition away from just relying on divisions and more towards brigades, again for flexibility. Because they're smaller, they don't need as many resources to transport them. The same thing is also with the Navy. I'm trying to make the Navy more active in certain areas and just the world in general, which includes one, not only building more ships, but also creating dedicated, what would you call them? Naval, not organizations, formations? Templates? Task forces. Let's just go with task forces. That can move quickly, and that are, while they're large, their response effectiveness, their ability to respond is quite flexible. The Air Force is kind of the same thing. I'm attaching aircraft to each, well, army, I guess you could say. So that takes the necessity of choosing missions and choosing locations to the AI. Well, of course, you still select the missions, but where it happens and when, I guess, is up to the AI. Okay, this is when I start altering the brigades and everything. Let me see. So eventually, once the goal is reached, which will be 1.5, 1.4, 1.5, something like that, million Army personnel in the field, that will mean that military spending will start to decrease. I don't think I'm going to increase it anymore. I think where it's at, from when I left off yesterday, I think that was fine. Yeah, I tried implementing amphibious and paratrooper forces in my mechanized brigades. The idea being giving it the ability to either paradrop, amphibious assault, or land attack, or all three. I think I'm going to go back to the all ground attack version, because that's just going to put a strain on how many units I can have, because you can only train so many special forces units at a time. The Marines and the Airborne count as special forces, so you can only have so many of those at one time. Or, well, actually, you can have a lot of them, but you can only train so many at once. You can increase that number by increasing the number of divisions you have. Okay, another thing that I'm not doing it in this one, but another thing I'm doing is starting to pivot more to the Pacific, because China. I don't know if they did the Belt and Road Initiative yet, but I know that they did. It's been pretty much confirmed or come out about the re-education camps, which is just completely inexcusable, and in game, every time I get that option, I always condemn it. Oh, also in the focuses, you see that I'm taking a more, I guess, right-wing approach to it. That's because for those ones align with my views, I guess, to some extent. And also because, at least to me, in terms of reducing spending, that makes more sense, right? Giving states more control. So reducing the control that the federal government has. It still has some degree of control and oversight, but overall, it's up to the states. That's what I did for healthcare. That's what I did for police. I'm not sure if there's anything other than that does it. Oh yeah, the civil rights one. and the marriage debate that was left up to the states. What else? School choice doesn't really have anything like that, so I just picked the status quo because it seems like it's the best out of the other options. Which it's pretty much keep the situation the same, but implement reforms to make the system more efficient, which is the whole point. It's to implement reforms that makes the system more efficient. So even though like I have the full selection for welfare, healthcare, and education, the spending is still low, or at least relatively low. And I don't know what I'm going to do about the expeditionary forces. I think I might start turning them into like dedicated like expeditionary task forces. I might have 2 or 3 helicopter carriers in one. I don't know. The goal for the carriers, which is why I'm researching, which is why researching both the nuclear carriers and the normal ones is because the goal is to be able to have more carriers without the high costs of continuously building the nuclear ones. The nuclear ones are still usable, yes, but they're a lot more expensive compared to the conventional ones. The conventional ones can have similar capabilities, or about the same capabilities, not really in terms of range, but everything else, and, you know, have lower costs. So you're pretty much getting the same thing, but lower cost. So that will be the trade-off, which I think is a good trade-off. Also, the helicopter carriers. There's one variant that I'm going to turn into a, or that I'm going to leave as is, and the other variant I'm going to turn into like a light carrier, or the closest thing to light carrier, so that can carry like, I don't know, something like multiple squadrons of fighters and light fighters and helicopters at the same time. The only real fighters you could use on a carrier that small are something like the Harrier, which is fine. You know, for a ship like that, which is really only supposed to be used for, really the support of an amphibious assault. You really don't need that many fighter jets, at least compared to a normal size carrier. I don't know. A lot of the striking power or firepower from an expeditionary strike group will come from naval gun support and from missile support. So you'll be seeing that later on. What else is going on? I don't know. Oh yeah, to help mitigate any economic damage, major industrial programs are still being put in place. Something like the previous ones I did, where it's reintroducing industry to the Great Lakes region and then expanding the heartland of the industrial heartland to include most of the Midwest, the Northeast, specifically the northern parts of New England, and most of the western states, or in this game they would be called the near western states, which are the ones that they're not the Pacific states, but they're the ones directly or just directly inland. with North and South. And it seems to actually be working. However, a lot of, I guess, the growth from that is going, a lot of the economic growth from that is kind of going to military spending, which is not really my intention. I didn't intend for that to happen, but, you know, it happens. But once we're at our goal or close to it, the military spending is going to be reduced. Right now, if I remember right, it was left off at around 200 billion. Now, I'm not saying it should be a low number. I'm just saying, you know, the spending needs to be kept in order. Yeah, this is when Lebanon invades Syria. Because of the debt wars. Not a very good idea. This is also when America's foreign policy is reformed. That was already started under Bush and Kucinich. That's how I think that's how you pronounce the last name of the previous leader, right? And it's more kind of not perfected, improved under Chris Cox, because the foreign policy is not so much using force. It's the best way I can describe it is how do I describe it? You know what? I'm just going to call it American Goodwill Policy, or American Goodwill, which essentially means genuine friendship and aid towards anyone that wants to be worked with and needs it. Oh yeah, and I couldn't upgrade that railway for some reason. It's like a combination of, you know, the good neighbor policy and the speak softly and carry a big stick policy. The good neighbor policy is what is the foreign policy that FDR or Franklin Delano Roosevelt had, which is a non-interventionist foreign policy compared to the previous, which was the Wilsonian interventionism policy. Which then the relations should more be focused on trade and diplomacy. So it takes the trade and diplomacy side of that and then combines it with Theodore Roosevelt's speak softly and carry a big stick foreign policy, which is kind of the same. You know, be diplomatic, be genuinely friendly, but also have the force to back yourself up if a fight happens. Yeah, it's kind of like a combination of both. So I would call it American Goodwill. A core tenet of it is like the end of militarism, at least the Cold War sense of militarism. You know, instead of just focusing solely on containing the Soviet Union, on containing communism to the point where we overthrow governments that do not actually pose a threat towards us or our allies because they're perceived to be socialist or communist. Instead of that, we just, first of all, acknowledge our mistakes. Second of all, apologize for them, because we at least acknowledge what we did. And then work to never do that again. Right? Never to undertake that sort of tunnel vision policy. And I don't know what Schroeder 2 is. So that would involve, instead of like directly intervening all the time, you could give like military aid and economic aid to democratic movements. focus should also be on trade deals as well. Intervene if necessary. We intervened in the Angola conflict because at this point it was just going on for too long. I mean, the Angolan Civil War had already been going on for 30 years, but it had continued, and even with an alliance of African nations, it was still continuing. And Angola, the Angolan government forces actually had been, making gains, which was a threat to UNITA, which is the democratic, I think the democratic movement for Congo, or no, for Angola. So it was a pretty big threat, I guess. So Chris Cox could be like, all right, we've held off long enough. Even with all these nations coming in and helping, it doesn't seem to be helping. It doesn't seem to be working, and in fact, it seems to be going in the wrong way. We're going to intervene quickly, and we're going to stop this, and then we're going to get out. Like the Gulf War. Get in, get out. So like I think it was 6 armored brigades were sent in. Because Chris Cox wouldn't allow, we weren't going to take like a, just infantry approach. It was clear that that wasn't working. And I mean, look at all the divisions that are around, not just for the UNITA forces, but also for Angola. I think Angola had something like 30 divisions, and I was confused as to how they were not only resisting for so long, but also how they were expanding their territory when, as far as I understand, remember, they were not getting any sort of military aid, and they had no intervention forces from other countries. So I don't know what was going on, and we use the I use the abilities basically because I'm not gonna we're not gonna take like just a backseat approach. No, we're gonna get in. We're gonna go in hard. We're going to hit them where it hurts. We're going to break right through them with just sheer brute force, and then end it. And it worked. I was kind of thinking I would have to push to the coast, but thankfully it didn't have to go that way. Yeah. Now, of course, these guys are, I think this is like a socialist party, but I mean, still. And then the second part, the next part of the goodwill policy comes into play, investing in the country and rebuilding its infrastructure. Now, I couldn't keep doing that because it was actually contributing to the national debt and was draining the treasury, and I was trying to get to the point where most of the debt could be paid off. I was reluctant to change to a globalized trade economy where most of my resources are sold, but it seems like that was the best option as far as like increasing income. Because it was either that or rely more on consumption, and the consumption economy model really did not provide that much of a boost. If anything, it just decreased a lot of the income. So, yeah, it was a choice between, okay, do I give all these resources away, which, I mean, a lot of them we don't need, because, I mean, look at all of them, or do we take more of the people's money and not get that much out of it? So I just went with the first option. This will come with a huge increase in oil production. Now this somewhat follows what happens in reality. What is it? I think through fracking, like hydraulic fracturing. That's called fracking sometimes. And the use of oil shales, and I think now oil sands. Oil that was not really easily accessible before. the oil production will increase by a lot. It's especially increased. Well, I think it slowly started under Obama, and then I think it was close to after he left, it really just took off. I think. If I remember right, I could be wrong. I don't remember. I know it really took off under Trump, or Donald Trump. I think that coincided with the legislation that they put in place. Oh yeah, hang on. I'll display something about exposure notifications. Exposure notifications. Oh, I can't actually. Yeah, it's done. I think yeah, the COVID emergency is, I think, as of today, if I remember right, the Biden administration announced the end of the COVID emergency, or announced the end of the state of emergency for COVID, which is, cool. I wish it was done earlier. But, you know, COVID sucked. I'm just gonna say that right now. Okay, what else we got? So oil production will increase, and also, and this is kind of following real life as well, but it would be undertaken earlier because of Chris Cox's reforms, which, would still be in, I guess you could say, the quote environmentalist line. Um, Old school environmentalism. I'm talking Theodore Roosevelt environmentalism, conservationism, stuff like that. Common sense conservationism. Uh, you know, yeah, let's extract these resources, but also let's not destroy the landscape around it. Let's ensure that this stays for future generations. You know, um, that allowed for mines. I know, especially across Minnesota, to be opened up, especially for, like, looking for rare earth materials, and looking for. Yep, there's the housing crash. Ah, man. Yeah, this is going to be a major issue for Cox. Which he does actually take some. He actually takes a good amount of measures to mitigate it, but he ends up losing the election. Now, you're probably wondering why. You know, he did so well. Uh, really, this kind of mirrors the real life, I guess, political climate. It really just depends on who you ask. Um, it was he was seen as not taking enough action when the recession came. Um, you can see, I mean, in this video and the last one, you can see a lot of action was taken, but not a lot of stimulus spending was done. There was a reason for that. While yes, it is a good idea, at least for this. Also, you gotta understand, it requires a lot of money, and that actually creates more debt when there's no buildup of money in the treasury. As of now, look at that. Like, the debt's already going up, or the yeah, the debt's already going up. Yeah. So I actually switched to a globalized trade economy to help mitigate that. It did a bit, but it's eaten up by military spending, which I will get in control of soon. That was another thing that was against Chris Cox. There were a lot of people that were against the continued growth of the military. Part of it because they thought it would, improve, it would increase, You know, part of it because of the increase in spending, but also because of the, people were worried it would lead to an increase in not nationalism, militarism. And both of those fears are valid. That can happen, and especially with the spending, that's proven. You know, he was also seen as weak because he stopped the um, expansion of the steel factories. He stopped the expansion of mines for technology and light metals in this game because he was trying to combat the influence of Wall Street. Now, this is because I'm trying to change the internal factions, and I have no idea how to do that. So I think in the next episode, I'm just gonna be like, it is what it is. Let's just use this while we have it. Oh yeah, and the decisions that I'm making as well. The regulatory roundabout, I think. That actually seems to be it. It used to be where you could only do one or the other, and if you picked one column, you could not pick another one. Like that was completely eliminated. Well, not eliminated, but you couldn't select it. Um, Now that doesn't seem to be the case. You can actually do both, which is awesome. I don't know why that is. I need to load I need to try a few other games that are Republican or Democrat and see, is this because of it, or is it because, the main parties are no longer in power? I don't know. Well, it's not that they're no longer in power, it's just that the establishment ones really aren't. Chris Cox would, at least in this game, be a constitutionalist, so I would say he would be more in favor of reducing the power of the federal government and giving that to the states. And I mean, as I can see, it seems to have done or made a good amount of progress. But he still basically made the point that the federal government does have a role, and during a time of economic crisis, its role is to invest in the economy and help those who have been affected. And by those who've been affected, I mean, the actual people who are affected, not like big airlines and whatnot. So when the round of stimulus comes around, there is no aid for there's not really any aid for big airlines or big oil companies because, they're the same ones that say, oh, you should have this much in savings, but the second a crisis comes, they're the first ones to crawl to the government because they don't have anything saved up, and we can't afford it. Even though even if they cut a bit off of the top people's like CEOs and people around them, their pay, if they cut it a bit, it would help. But still. So the aid actually goes to small businesses. Sorry. My microphone, my headphones decided to not cooperate with me. Sorry. Part of the increased economic growth is the building of new naval yards for the expansion of the Navy, which would either be the building of new ships or it would be for the repair of them and the building of new convoys, which is possible, which is possibly needed. I might need to start that. I don't remember if I did. Convoys are so easy to build in the game, even just the base game. You just get one line and you get it all full, like all 15 naval yards, building them, and like within a year or two, you've got 1,000, depending on how like the efficiency level. It's crazy, and I've got programs in place. like economic programs in place for this. So this is just even more ridiculous. Imagine the same line probably could get 1,000 in a month. So Chris Cox loses the election to Bill Merrill? Is that his name? Bill Merrill? Of the Reform Party. We'll see in a few in-game days. But Chris Cox tries to end by issuing one of the only attacks he really does, because he was seen more as a calm, composed figure, which is really what he was in real life to some extent, or to a large extent. But he was, his goal was to attack the nationalists because of the rise in not just the right-wing populist movement, but also the rise of militarism, which could be partially because of the increase in military spending, partially because, it's nationalism. So yeah, I just made sure that came in. It's like, no, you can't do whatever you want. I am going to control this. This is my game. And then, yeah, that's Bill Merrill, who's, yeah. So this, all the railroad stuff, this is essentially supposed to be the in-game version of building the high-speed rail network. This has been an issue for decades in this country, and I still do not understand. Well, I do understand, but I don't know. I don't understand. Never mind. It's the debate around it has been really stupid. I'll say that right now. Everywhere that high-speed rail has been in place, it has worked and is done quite well. We do have the economic ability to actually build it, as an example. And we've done it to some extent in New York, but it was just so, I don't know, convoluted that it's not even a true high-speed line, because there's still so many old bridges and pieces of track that were built, some of them as far back as like as after the Civil War, which nothing against them. It's awesome that they lasted this long, but it also means that it can't support the speed that a real high-speed system needs. And a high-speed rail line or high-speed rail system would be a good competitor with airlines, at least in terms of like regional airlines or short-distance airlines. What is it? At a certain distance, what is it, around 500 miles or so between each city, it becomes too long to drive, too short to fly. That's especially the case with LA and San Francisco. So that's where rail comes in, and especially high-speed rail. This isn't necessarily just building it, this is also identifying like where it's going to go. The rest of it is, I'm going to just say like it's been upgraded. So instead of just regular railroads, it's like, the entire system is pretty much electrified. How shocking. This would allow for heavier freight loads to be moved at once, requiring less locomotives. Electric locomotives have less maintenance requirements than diesels because they have less moving parts. While they're up front, they're more expensive. In the long run, they're actually less costly. So that would be a big benefit. They're quieter. And not only that, but the power lines that you can use that are used by electric trains, the overhead ones, the pantographs, can be used or could be used as additional like power lines like for the electrical grid, which would help in improving the overall electrical grid. Yeah, I didn't know what that was. That was, I think, the airborne units. The full high-speed network won't really start until the next episode, which, Lord willing, you'll see by the end of, either by the end of next week or the week after. I don't know. It depends on how I edit this. I don't think I'm going to cut anything out. This is just like a raw kind of reaction, except for the first 5 minutes of this. I watched it just to make, I guess, just to make sure it was working right. Okay, so we're getting to the end. So I hope you all have enjoyed this, and I hope you... I'm sorry you had to put up with my babbling. I'll try and be more coherent, Lord willing, in the next episode. But until then, I hope you enjoyed. God bless you all, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out.